This episode of Comics Are Dope is brought to you by the Epiphany Engine, a 192-page graphic novel that, if successfully funded, will be the biggest independent Black comics crossover of all time. And this might be the easiest ad read ever because the whole episode is about it. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. My next guest probably needs no introduction, but if he didn't, then what would I be here for? So we're talking to someone who's been in this industry for about 31 years now, editing on some of your favorite characters. In fact, most of your favorite characters, particularly if you are a fan of, say, Batman or, I don't know, Static. You know, there's a lot of different characters this man has had his hands on, and a lot of things he's done over the course of these 31 years. But this next project that we're here to talk about is perhaps among the most ambitious. So here to talk to me about the Epiphany Engine is Mr. Joseph Illidge. How you doing today, man?
Doing good. How are you, Brandon?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, man. It's always great to talk to Milestone alum and really just to have a good time.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me here. Love the cap. Love the representation. Always good to see that logo.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And so, again, we're here to talk about Epiphany Engine, and this project is just massive. So, as this goes live, today is Independence Day. This campaign launched on Juneteenth. I think both really fitting holidays sort of earmark what we're talking about here. A collection of independent Black creators bringing their characters to a 192-page graphic novel for the crossover of all crossovers. And we'll talk a bit about the inspirations of that. But then for the campaign to launch on Juneteenth, also such a special day for Black America. This is big. This is really big. And so before we talk about, this sort of representing the future of Blacks in comics, if you will, your career started with another company that was very much forward looking at Milestone. And you've talked about this several times, but I do want to ask you just what was it about Milestone that made you say, no, I can't be on the sidelines for this. I've got to jump in.
It was really that I didn't think something like Milestone was possible. So I'm a kid of the 70s. I'm a teenager of the 80s. And so at that time, to be Black and to be a public comic book fan, that really meant you had no social life, right? You were a pariah, you were an outcast. And so I, have been reading comic books since I've been in the second grade. And through those years, I would discover characters like the X-Men and Luke Cage through Power Man and Iron Fist, the Justice League of America, the Legion of Superheroes, Master of Kung Fu. So I grew up on these stories, and I did not realize that there was a place for the confluence of being Black and being a fan, an avid reader of comic books, and a business future.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand that the three of those things could combine into a tangible career. Milestone was the thing that showed me that that was possible. And when I first saw one of their comic books, because I had heard of Milestone through various sources, whether it was through reading some articles about the books going to launch in a few months, or through a friend of mine who started there as an intern, I knew of their existence. But it's one thing to know that something exists and to see tangible proof of it. And seeing the comic books made me understand that that was a real viable path for me. And so that's what made it irresistible. Milestone was a more viable path for me than Marvel or DC Comics in a number of ways,
Mhm.
right? And so that's what made it irresistible, that there was nothing out there like it. Yes, there were other Black comic book publishers, and they had the independent comics. Of course, you had Brother Man. You had a publisher called Ania that I believe launched the same year as Milestone, 1993.
Mhm.
But the breadth of the Milestone Dakotaverse, coupled with their publishing deal with DC Comics, made them an organization like no other. And the governing body of Milestone was made up of these veterans. I was aware of Dwayne McDuffie's work for years. Dennis Cowan, I first became aware of his work on Power Man and Iron Fist, and then I first became aware of those two getting together as a team in the Deathlock prestige format miniseries, which would then lead to them working together on the Deathlock ongoing series. And Derek T. Dingle came from Black Enterprise Magazine. So these were seasoned veterans that came together to do this. And so there was no way that I could know that that was real and have the evidence in my hands
Mhm.
and not make a move for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. It's funny because I'm born in 91 and I only vaguely knew that comics even existed. I'm from North Carolina. I would see comics when I went to New York for the summers with my grandmother, but for whatever reason, I just thought that just exists there. But I grew
Mm,
up on animation, so Batman, the X-Men, Spider-Man, and then a bit later, Static Shock, and that was the first time I'd seen a hero that looked like me in any meaningful way, right? And so I loved that show and still didn't know that it was based on a comic book. Maybe I wasn't reading the credits quickly enough, right? So it's not until 4 or 5 years ago that I
mm,
discovered the whole Dakota universe in comics. And what's funny is they had rumored the Static movie. And so prices on a Static #1 just shot up
yep.
for that time period. I think it was like $80 to $100 to get a copy. And I was
For
like,
the
well,
whole collection, you would go on
yeah.
eBay and people would be selling the entire first run of Static for like $3,000.
Yes, yes, it was insane. And so I ended up grabbing all these other Milestone books first. So the first Milestone book I actually read was Icon. And
Mm,
when I read Icon issue 1, that
mm-hmm,
hooked me. I was
mm-hmm.
like, it's the themes, like the I bet this wouldn't happen to Superman, Icon being surprised that he's being profiled, like all of it. I was like, yo, I've never seen anything like this. Like this is amazing. Um, and then it continues into issue 2. And my understanding is that issue 2 is what got you to say, oh no, I gotta be part of this.
100%. Icon number 2 changed the direction of my life. There
Man,
is no exaggeration to that point.
wow. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I ended up thankfully it was the pandemic, so we got a few stimulus checks and whatnot. And ended up filling out my milestone collection over the next few years. I
Wow.
just completed Hardware 50. No, Hardware 49 was the last book I needed for a really long time. And I
Mm-hmm.
just grabbed
Mm-hmm.
that last year. And so now I have all of the original Milestone
Wow.
comics. So I'm
That's what's
excited.
up. That's what's up. That's
And
a collection.
right. And then they released the compendiums. And I was like, oh, okay, well,
Yes, yes. I have them right here.
yeah. Yeah, I bought them too.
Yeah.
I bought 2 sets. My idea is once they finish them out, I don't know if it'll be 4 or 5 volumes based on the miniseries that have been left out to this point. But once they're finished, I'm gonna disassemble the second set and do custom individual hardcovers of the series.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's a great idea.
So that's the
Yeah.
project, unless DC announces otherwise. But
Yeah, no, I think that's a good project you got going in. By my count, I think if they do a fourth compendium, that will collect all of the milestone books. And to your point, that will take into consideration miniseries that we haven't seen yet. A notable one is the Y Son miniseries by Ho Che Anderson.
Right. Right. So yeah, I'm hoping all that gets collected, but if not, it's already collected in my house, so it works for me.
That's what's up.
Um, but anyway, you spent obviously formative years at Milestone, and it prepared you for everything that was coming next. And with that, I kind of do want to just jump right in to Epiphany Engine. Um, just from your point of view, can you explain what the Epiphany Engine is?
So, the Epiphany Engine is a 192 page graphic novel, and it represents the culmination of collaboration of 45 different Black independent comic book publishers, over 60 creators, and I'd say over 65 characters.
Mm,
And it's a story about a family of Black scientists, genius explorers, the McCallie family, and how a nemesis scatters them throughout the multiverse,
mm,
separates all five family members, father, mother, two sons, and a daughter. And it takes the Black independent superheroes of the last 30 years of publishing to bring the family back together for a final battle against this nemesis. And at the core of this is a story about the relationship between Black fathers and Black sons,
mm,
right? Which has a number of layers to it. And this project came about because Tony Cottrell, who is the founder of Advent Comics, which is an independent publisher that is celebrating its 15th anniversary this year, last August, he did a post on Facebook, which was a call to action for a singular collective effort
mm,
from Black creators and publishers. And so many people answered that call to action that he realized, okay, it has to be done. And so he called me in October of last year and asked me to come on board as editor, which I did. And so all this time from October to now, and even before I came on board, there's been a lot of behind the scenes work building this, really getting the story crafted. And the
mm.
story is so big because, again, it's 192 pages. It is a graphic novel in the truest sense of the word, a singular adventure. And there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of creators. There are a lot of characters that have to be represented. And so it's been almost a year of work behind the scenes to prepare for the Kickstarter campaign, which launched on June 19th, which is Juneteenth,
Mm.
right? Commemorating the official legal end of slavery. Of course, there were those nations that chose to ignore this,
Right.
but that represents historically the beginning of our liberation
Mm,
in this nation and other nations, quite frankly. And so we felt that there was something symbolic about launching the campaign on that day. And so far, we've been going at a really good pace, and we've had people from within the Black community, people outside of the Black community, but part of the larger comic book industry community
mm.
supporting this, really increasing awareness of it. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to see. And it's really a day by day adventure for us.
Right.
And so that is the story of how this came to be and how this book is going to represent a level of collaboration in the Black indie comics community that has not been seen. There have been a few other crossovers,
Mhm.
but not one of this scale. This will be the highest scale one.
Yeah, no. 45 different publishers, 65 different characters. Um, this came on my radar when the original announcement came out or when the press release came out. And because I'm pretty tight with Danny at Fourth Wall Comics, the creator of Ace Blade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and over the years, with the channel, I've been supporting different independent Black creators. And so I saw Acolytes a part of it. And,
Yep.
like there's just a little bit of everyone, like Omari Malik from Blacktooth, like just a lot of different independent creators who I've spoken to on an individual basis. And, I was just at Heroes Con last weekend and we're all having a powwow, right? Like I saw Javon, who did a lot of character designs, Greg, who had done some initial story work, Omari was there, well, Ray Height. So like we're all here and we're talking about this project and just sort of the scale of things. But that was the first time I had seen so many of these people interacting or necessarily like associated with each other. Um, and I can immediately understand, right, like why you were brought in to sort of help facilitate this big ball of creativity that's here, right? You're no stranger to one sort of shepherding new universes in. You've been doing that since you left Milestone. You're no stranger to crossover or big multi-part events or stories, right? Like for those who don't know, you edited No Man's Land, which is widely considered the greatest Batman crossover that has been, at least Batman family related. Um, and so you've done a lot over the years to sort of strengthen these chops. But I'm curious to know, with all of these different publishers, all these different characters, and no sort of Bible to refer to, no sense of the backstory of everyone. How do you go about editing a book like this?
So, it's an excellent question because I remember when I was executive editor of Heavy Metal magazine for 3 years, and Heavy Metal is an anthology.
Mhm,
And a lot of people will see it and think, well, this person's just editing one book.
mhm,
But editing an issue of Heavy Metal is like editing 10 different books because there are 10 different stories, each with their creative teams and all that entails. And you have to monitor all of those different things, which you're editing to different levels of depth, right?
mhm,
And so with something like Epiphany Engine, the way the story is structured is there's a main chapter that introduces the McCallie family and their first battle with their nemesis, who's called Absalom. And their scattering throughout the multiverse fractures the story into character centric chapters as each of them go through these personal and horrifying trials and meet up with different Black heroes from throughout the multiverse of Black heroes. And then they're brought together at the end to a showdown chapter. So it has a structure where it's one thing that fractures and cascades and then realigns and reintegrates. And so there's a lot of moving parts insofar as all the different creators who have been kind enough and really just forward thinking enough to have their characters included in this. It's a matter of make sure those characters look the way they're supposed to look from every angle. One of the things that was done even before I came on board is a PDF was created in which different creators gave us a file on their character and some visuals. So we actually have a behind the scenes PDF that is basically the official handbook of the Black superhero indie multiverse,
yeah,
right? With like files, turnarounds, visuals on all these different characters, whether it's Mega Woman or whether it's Ace Blade or Midnight Tiger, right? It's like we
mhm,
have visuals on all these characters. So there's that. There's really developing the overall superstructure of the story. There's figuring out what creators are the best creators to work on this. So this is the kind of story that we want to be timeless. It's
mhm,
going to be a story that has universal appeal. It is created for Black creators by Black creators, and it's a universal story, the same way that the Black Panther film is a story that was forged by Black writers and a Black director, Black actors, Black costume designers,
Yeah.
right? There was so much of a collection of us in the creation of that film, but Black Panther is a film with a universal story. So that is how we see Epiphany Engine as a story about the strength of the family unit and how the family unit can endure many different trials to come together stronger in the aftermath of it. And so, one of the important things was we needed a strong creative team to kick this off, right? Because you have to have quality from end to end, but it's basically like in any novel, there's the hook sentence, the first sentence that pulls you in. In any film, there's the first 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes determine, am I in or am I out? So the first chapter of this story is basically the first 20 minutes of the film that is the Epiphany Engine. So we brought together Brandon Thomas, really one of the best writers in North American comics. People know his work from the Excellence series that he did with Kari Randolph and Emilio Lopez and Darren Bennett for Image and Robert Kirkman's Skybound imprint. His excellently written relaunch of Hardware Season 1 for the Milestone relaunch, Batman Black and White, Aquaman, the list goes on, right? And so we paired him up with Shawn Damian Hill. Shawn Damian Hill is really just one of the best artists to really grow in, I would say, the last 4 years.
Right.
He really rocked this Deathlock story for Marvel's Voices. He's just been announced as the artist of a new series spinning out of the Marvel Blood Hunt summer event. And so bringing those two together, that's the kind of quality that was required. And one thing that's really important is that there's quality throughout this story and that the different chapters really speak to different genres, whether it's horror or fantasy or science fiction. And so it's picking the right writer and artist team to really lean into that genre and that character. And I'm just really thrilled to be a part of the behind the scenes team and to work with these different creators and see this book come together.
Yeah. So you hit on a few things I want to touch on. So earlier you mentioned like Brother Man and Ania, and I guess historically the greater surrounding context of Milestone is that Milestone was a part of a wave of a bunch of independent comics imprints in the early to mid 90s, and a lot of them fizzled out. A part of Milestone's story, though, is that there was like a bit of contention within like the Black community and among other publishers, accusing them of being sellouts for working with DC. And then, we could call it jealousy, we could call it whatever we call it. But the point is there's conflict and there's like this sort of, I guess from the outside, we'd look at it as like the crabs in a barrel sort of thing, right? And you also mentioned just all of these different creators who have, sort of lent their characters to this story. With this many publishers and characters and essentially egos involved, how is it managing the creators' expectations on how their characters are being used or how many pages they're writing or drawing and things like that? How do you navigate that in service of the greater goal being accomplished in this book seeing publication?
So in terms of character representation, each of these publishers, each of these creators, lent a character or two characters to the graphic novel. So the responsibility is making sure that visually they're represented correctly and that whatever writer has them in one of their chapters, that it aligns with how the character is represented in their own comic book, in their own publishing universe. And it's interesting when you talk about managing egos and you talk about the past and the type of contention and the type of accusations that were thrown at Milestone. So we had to do the job 5 days a week, we had to go into the office and do the job. So we didn't really have the time to be distracted by judgments,
Mm.
right? You have to go in and do the job, right? And when you talk about the wisdom, or what I'll call the cultural integrity of their decision to work with DC Comics, DC Comics was a mechanism for distribution that exposed these characters and their stories to a larger audience. And let's just be clear about how innovative Milestone was in 1993. A lot of the things that these publishers are taking credit for now, in terms of racial diversity, in terms of sexual lifestyle diversity, in terms of showing characters that are disabled, in terms of showing a wide variety of characters who are Latino or Latinx or Spanish,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
In terms of showing the variety of Black life,
Hmm.
right? There was no company that did all of that
Right.
before Milestone in the 90s, right?
Right.
And let's be clear, by Milestone and DC having a business partnership, that's how Warner Brothers became aware of Static. And that's how you get the Static Shock cartoon,
Hmm.
which is basically a pebble in the pond. The ripple effects will go on for decades and decades, and you and I will be long and dead, and the ripple effects will still go on, because Static Shock, the first cartoon superhero, young Black male lead, that he is the titular character of the story,
Hmm.
right? That happens because of the DC, thus Warner Brothers, Milestone relationship. The Static Shock cartoon has inspired and ignited two generations of Black people. To
Hmm.
your own experience, that was the first time young Black people saw themselves as the lead character, the
Yeah.
cartoon named after them, and they saw the truth of Black life in America in Static Shock,
Yeah.
right? They saw racism, they saw bullying, they saw when you have an extraordinary level of intelligence, but you're constantly put into positions where you have to prove yourself. They saw self doubt. They saw all of these things that were part of their lives in that cartoon, right? And so the impact of Static Shock validates, if nothing else, validated the business partnership between Milestone and DC Comics. The Static Shock cartoon and everything that it has done going forward definitely does. And so there's no singular model for business. That's just a fact. Entrepreneurship takes different forms, right? And it's interesting because when I look at my career and you talk about the through line from Milestone to the Epiphany engine, we now have Kickstarter, right? And Kickstarter is the great equalizer. It is the means by which a number of Black independent publishers have managed to continue their business and grow their businesses
Hmm.
and have a direct contact with the audience. They're not separated by a distributor anymore. Back in the 90s, if you did not have a distributor, you didn't know how your comic books were getting to the audience. I guess you'd have to have them in a suitcase and go convention by convention by convention,
Yeah.
right? But now you have crowdfunding, you have direct contact with the community, you have growing relationships, and you have that kind of reciprocity. And there's the social contract, which is your customers
Hmm.
will support you and you will deliver the best product that you can, the best stories, the best characters, the best artwork. And that's how you build these relationships. So now we're looking at Black people being able to engage an entirely relatively new mechanism for
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. So the kind of symbolism of Epiphany Engine being facilitated and ignited through Kickstarter is just really perfect. And it speaks to how things have continued to evolve and change in the comic book industry over the last 3 decades.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, there are so many books that I would not have known about if not for Kickstarter, and honestly wouldn't have existed without Kickstarter. Um, I feel like comics are in a weird spot on Kickstarter right now. They're not as prioritized as they once were. Um, but the fact is, people are building audiences, people are building communities, they're building relationships with their fans, and now can take what they've gotten on Kickstarter, go directly to this audience, or use it as proof of concept. Some of them are using it to spin out, like Concrete Comics is now distributed by Diamond. And so now I'm able to go and grab Acolyte from my comic shop as opposed to buying it online or waiting for the next convention to come into town. And
That's
so
right.
you're right. It is the great equalizer. Um, and so, okay, so basically the way everything's working, people have their characters, they've given the turnarounds, they've given the sort of backstory, and it's on you guys to just make the best product you can make given the information that you have. Um, and with that, can we talk about just some of the talent involved? And you talked about Brandon Thomas and Sean Hill. Who are some of the other creatives on this title?
Some of the writers that we have include Colleen Douglas, who's a horror writer. She just released her latest graphic novel called Silk Cotton,
Mm,
which is published by Rosarium Publishing. You have Greg Burnham, who is one of the co-creators of the Tuskegee Airs.
mm,
You have Rodney Barnes, known for his work on television, whether it's Boondocks or Runaways or Winning Time. And he's the author and co-creator of the monthly image series Philadelphia and various spin-offs. We have Stephen Harris, well-known artist going back to DC Comics on Aztec and Motown Machine Works Comics on The Crush, and he's worked on Batman, Captain America, Deadpool. We have Chris Cross, a Milestone veteran who's worked on all the popular characters.
mm,
He's probably worked for all of the top 10 publishers, if not 8 out of 10 of them, right?
mm,
Um, Jamal Eigel, Aletha Martinez, David Brame, Eric Battle.
mm.
The list just goes on, man. And that's part of the beauty of this is that the list just goes on,
Right.
right? Because that just speaks to how many talented people are out there to call together for one singular effort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the names you're mentioning, right? Like for those who don't know, like if you know, you know, but if you don't, these are like luminaries. These are legends, right? These are like sort of our heroes from past and present, right? And even like, future, right? Like people who maybe they're working behind the scenes, maybe they're characters you don't know about, but they lent them to the project, right? Like this book represents so much um, of what the Black comic space has been over the years, but also where it's going. So it's an awesome project to support for that reason. Um, I'll ask you this, right? Like you've been in this space for about as long as it's been a space, right? With not to disregard contributions of Black writers and artists, long before the 90s. But for as long as there's been this sort of independent movement of comics, you've been in the mix. How have you seen the space evolve? You talked about like sort of the introduction of Kickstarter, and where do you see it going?
One of the ways it's evolved is that we're seeing more of a diversity of ideas. I think when the Black independent comics movement of the 90s, right, which is definitely a coalescence point, that's a spike,
Hmm.
right? Obviously, before that, You have All Negro Comics, which came out in June of 1947.
Hmm.
You have the Golden Legacy books, which had the biographies of Martin Luther King Jr. and Harriet Tubman. And so you had various Black independent comics, but the 90s was a spike point. And because so many of us grew up on the superhero genre, I think what you saw was a lot of superheroes.
Hmm.
That was the dominant genre. You look at the movement now, and it's going across all the genres,
Yeah.
right? You're talking horror, fantasy, science fiction, romance, slice of life, and oh, yes, superheroes,
Mhm.
right? So the expansiveness of the stories that Black creators are putting out into the world, that's changed. Another thing that's changed is, again, because you have crowdfunding, you're not dependent upon the mechanisms of the direct market that involves a distributor and involves retailers,
Mhm.
right? You can have your books that you produce, send them direct to your customers on this express line chain, right?
Mhm.
And also, to your point, though, publishers that have started on Kickstarter have gone on to now have their books distributed by Diamond, right? Because basically you had this shift where Diamond was no longer a monopoly. Other distributors came up, various high level publishers left Diamond,
Mhm.
and so it left this space. And nature abhors a vacuum, right? So,
Right.
what was part of occupying this space? All these Black publishers who had been putting in the work for years were right there with their bodies of work. And
Mhm.
so there was a mutually beneficial opportunity there,
Yeah.
right? But it doesn't happen if you are not putting in the work,
Yeah.
right? And so those are two ways in which the industry has changed. Another way in which it's changed is it was a male dominated industry, right?
Mhm.
Now you look, and there are statistics that will say 52% of the readership is women, the readership of comics. And that's just direct market comics. That doesn't even get into the trade book market of graphic novels, right?
Mhm.
And you're seeing more women behind the scenes in business than ever before. So you're seeing something closer to gender parity, although
Mhm.
clearly there's a lot more work to do, but
Yeah.
certainly closer than it was in the last decade of the 20th century,
Mhm.
right? Major strides in that regard. So, those are some of the most significant changes that I've seen in this journey of mine throughout the industry over the last 31 years. And it's great. It's great that the things that the world that we wanted, that we fought for, that we sometimes lost the battle for, the war ultimately has been won in a variety of ways. And so to be able to be here and see this growth and see the manifestation of things that we only imagined that we hope would come to pass
Mhm.
is pretty fulfilling. I'm
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that I am here to see it and be a part of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think Paul called this period a new Black Renaissance, and I would agree. Paul of Black Comic Lords, for those listening. Um, but
100%.
yeah, it's been awesome to watch, right? But also, right, the best indicator of a future behavior is past actions, right? And you've been around long enough. You were there in the last days of Milestone. You mentioned heavy metal. They've recently had their own troubles. Um, I'm curious to know what you're seeing or have seen as maybe pitfalls that this new sort of crop of talent should be looking to avoid if we're going to continue this longer.
Well, let's talk about your mention of the crabs in the barrel um, scenario
Mm.
and what we'll call and this term has obviously been used before, but the haterade that
Mm-hmm.
was basically thrown at Milestone back in the day. So those things have to come to an end, right? That kind of stuff is petty, right? And so one of the great things about the Epiphany engine is the title is not just a fictional title, it's a metafictional title. The engine is the truth that is powered by all these creators that we can collaborate
Mm-hmm.
and make amazing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That enough of us can do it without the infighting, without the ego competition, that we can come together towards a singular goal and that everyone can have their place in it,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's also important for creators to look out for is their rights. All creators really need to have some kind of legal representation.
Mm-hmm.
Do not sign a contract and think that you understand that contract. You need to have someone looking out for you. As creators evolve in their careers, they have to know what their monetary value is
Mm-hmm.
as a creator. And they have to look out for what they're getting paid or what they're not getting paid. And they have to understand that if they're independent creators, if they're freelancers and they're running their own careers, they're a business.
Mm-hmm.
They need to understand themselves as a limited liability corporation, and they need to treat their career and themselves accordingly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they need to understand that the ideas that they create, the original ideas, have the capacity to be significant intellectual properties, and to think of those intellectual properties the same way we think about properties in real estate,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's an investment in a piece of what we'll call idea landscape, and you nurture it and you improve it and its value appreciates,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't just abandon it, you don't neglect it. It's something that you believe in. If it grows to a certain point, you can pass it along to your children. You know, we as creators and these new creators have to embrace the understanding that they are not at the core of their existence labor. At
Mm-hmm.
the core of their existence, they are businesses,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really have to adopt that mindset to shape their futures.
Right. Yeah, you talk about the groundbreaking nature of the Milestone DC deal, right? I think uh, a point that may get lost in that is that Milestone was an independent entity, right? Before DC came along, Milestone was a company. These characters were Milestone's intellectual property. And if DC wanted to play ball with them, it had to play ball on their terms. Um, and, thankfully they had the business acumen to view themselves that way and ultimately secure a deal that honestly hasn't really been seen since.
Yeah, that was really, I believe, the first of its kind at that time. The only parallel that I've seen to that in the present day is the publishing deal that Unique Studios, created by Roy Coupe, has
Mhm.
with Dark Horse Comics,
Yes.
right? So basically, Unique was a publisher.
Hmm.
Dark Horse made an offer to be the macro publisher
Hmm.
of their line, their past library, and future ideas going forward,
Right.
right? And Unique Studios is able to retain ownership,
Hmm.
right? So that is really the closest parallel I've seen. But even that does not have all of the nuances
Hmm.
that the business partnership between Milestone Media LLC and DC Comics have.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, um, Unique Studios does have a series in development with, I believe it's HBO Max is doing the Ayanu Child of Wonder
Yeah,
series.
Ianu Child of Wonder. It's HBO Max and Cartoon Network and Lion Forge Animation.
Mm. That is awesome. I'm excited to see it. If you guys haven't read that book, by the way, what's cool about Unique is that all of their books are graphic novels or they're published as graphic novels. So you don't have to wait around for an issue here, an issue there. Just go grab the story. They've got Wale, they've got feel like I'm saying that name wrong. It's like EXO is the
Oh, yeah, no, I know. Yeah, it is EXO. I think it's EXO.
mhm.
They have Malika,
Malika
they
Warrior
have
Queen.
Windmaker,
Hmm.
um, and they just launched, I think a new book just came out. I
Hmm.
feel like it's called the Isiris. I think it's Isiris.
Let's look it up.
So, yeah, and I believe the books are made by all Nigerian talent,
Hmm. Yes.
right? Which is, of course, especially in the North American space, unprecedented for a
Yes.
company of that scale.
Absolutely. Right. Like the Asiri, you're right, is the name
The
of that
Asiri,
book.
yep,
Oh, and then EXO, The Legend of Wale Williams. That's why Wale was
yes,
in my head.
that's
So
right.
awesome. But yeah, so back to the Epiphany engine. So as you guys hear this, we are straight up midway through the campaign. It's a 30-day campaign. We've got about 14 days to go as you see this or listen to this interview. Um, let's talk a little bit about what all you can get from this campaign.
So there are a lot of different tiers. You know, some of the starting tiers basically involve getting the paperback book, and you can get different cover options. The
Mm,
main cover, which has become the iconic image that represents the crossover, is that cover by Crisscross, which I
mhm.
believe has about 42 different characters.
Right.
And so you can get that. There are covers by Stanley Weaver and LeBeau Underwood, by Jamal Igle, by Marcus the Visual Williams,
Hmm.
by Aletha Martinez, by Sean Damian Hill. So, you know, that's one of the things that we really wanted to use the covers as an
Hmm.
opportunity to bring even more talent from different generations. Right now, you're looking at a part of a cover by Eric Battle and Andrew Dalhouse,
Mm,
right? So that's one thing. The starting versions are paperback. There will be a hardcover version available. That
okay.
amazing cover there is by Kanan White
Mm,
and Walt Barna,
mm,
which was kind of done in this 1970s, 80s style when you would see a Marvel Avengers comic and one of their teammates was in danger and the faces of the other teammates would be floating and looking
right.
at the situation.
Right.
So, you know, we did an homage there to that. And there's a beautifully painted cover. That's Marcus the Visual Williams from Tuskegee Airs.
Mm,
There's this really beautiful cover by Chris Mosby, which is a painted cover, which has Jackie McCallie, the mother, and she's running toward the camera, and she has this light sword. That's
wow.
just a beautiful cover. And so there will be paperback editions, hardcover editions. There will be prints. There will be packages which combine books and prints.
Mm,
We're going to be dealing with a lot of stretch goals, which you'll be seeing. These stretch goals will access other covers. And
mm,
something that we do every Friday, we have something called Drop Fridays. So every Friday, we reveal a new cover
mm,
that will be connected to a stretch goal that once the campaign reaches a certain point, everyone will have access to that cover. What you're seeing recently, there was a cover by Ray Anthony Height,
mm,
creator of Midnight Tiger, this beautiful black and white cover right there.
mm,
And so the color version for that will be coming up soon. And that's another thing. This campaign is happening and we're continuing to produce the book.
mm.
So both those efforts are happening in tandem, right? The
Yeah.
book continues to be produced. Tony Cottrell and Advent Comics invested to get the book started before the campaign, and it will be produced through most of this year. And once the campaign is funded, people who are entitled to books will have books in their hands by January 2025.
Awesome. Awesome. Just in time for my birthday, and
That's
that
it.
works
That's
for
it.
me.
Look at that.
These covers are beautiful. And what I love about the covers is that they do also give you the opportunity to one, like sort of show support for your favorite of some of these independent creators or some of these characters. I think like if I have to go with just one cover, it's got to be the crisscross cover, right?
It's,
Like,
it's really wild, but that one again, it's such an iconic representation of what this idea is. If one cover exemplified the concept more than any, it's that one,
yeah,
right? And then what the others do is they represent more focused lenses
right,
that go into certain pairings and certain scenarios.
right.
And it's interesting to see like who picks what artist and how they're torn, but they'll go with the Jamal Igle one, they'll go with the Eric Battle one, they'll go with the Chris Mosby one, or the Marcus the Visual. And that's part of what we wanted to do. We wanted to create that kind of excitement that you have so many different styles and aesthetics.
Mhm.
That's like, wow, can I only pick one? Because we recognize that, a significant part of the comic book community is the collector's market. The
Mhm.
people who they want the high art.
Yeah,
They want the covers that represent high art. They want to follow their favorite creators, like you said. They may have been a fan of Jamal Igle going back to his work on Supergirl.
mhm.
Okay, they want to get the Jamal Igle cover. They've been a fan of Eric Battle going back to when he did work on Aquaman. Okay, so we want the Eric Battle cover. The box set is, of course, a premium package. And so
Right.
that's another thing. We have these things at different levels, and people have different tastes, they have different resources. So we wanted there to be something for everyone. And the higher up you go in terms of your contribution, then you have access to more high grade packages.
Yeah, I wanted to show off this for the audio listeners. I'm looking at the Epiphany Engine box set, and what you get in this box set is the hardcover edition of Epiphany Engine, a t-shirt, a coffee mug, and all of those softcover variants. So, for those of you who are having a hard time choosing, you don't necessarily have to choose.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make the deep investment, and some people like that, they want all the covers, they want the full expansive experience because they understand that not only does that give them access to all of the art, but this is a moment in history. This book is going to be historic, the same way how the Milestone compendiums are sitting on my bookshelf behind me, or Excellence is.
Mhm.
30 years from now, we want Epiphany Engine to be sitting on people's bookshelves as this point in time of unparalleled collective Black entrepreneurship and action in the comic book industry, right? And in entertainment at large in a number of ways. And there's even, some real high ticket packages.
Mhm.
One of them involves a Zoom conversation with Tony Cottrell,
Mhm.
the publisher of Epiphany Engine, through his company Advent Comics, and myself, and really talking about the process of this book and things that you can learn from us to help be the wind behind the sails of your own project,
Mhm.
right? There's a tier where you can have a character of yours cameo in the Epiphany Engine. There's a
Mhm.
tier where you can appear in a cameo in the Epiphany Engine. And so we wanted to do all these different fun things,
Yeah.
right? Like this is an experience. This is not just us asking people for money. We're inviting people for the ride of a lifetime.
Mhm.
If you're a comic book fan or you're a fan of high adventure stories, right? And so each of these packages represents a piece of the collective experience of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that all of these tiers, or most of them, are named after songs.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
Listen, that's the genius of Tony Cottrell. And I'm listen, we're talking the 90s, right? The
yeah.
90s when I was at Milestone and you know, the groups that I grew up listening to, it was Mobb Deep and Tribe Called Quest, it was Public Enemy, it was Boogie Down Productions,
Hmm.
basically ruled hip hop for a while. And so it's wild. These are the things that I'm listening to when I'm writing, when I'm editing, I'm really doing the deep dive into, some of the seminal things, or even going back further. If you want to talk about R&B and you want to talk about Parliament, one thing
Hmm.
about Milestone is Dwayne McDuffie, who was a co-founder and editor in chief, he really brought in a lot of music references
Hmm.
to those early Milestone comics, like Parliament, George Clinton,
Yeah, there's the Maggot
Bootsy
Brain cover.
Collins, all over it. Oh yeah, listen, listen. Now, how are we gonna do an event like this and not do an homage to Jim Lee's X-Men #1 cover, right?
Right.
So what Michael Watson has done with that, again, that is acknowledging something that is this fixed point in time in the history of comics, but doing it with our spin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In a way that no other community can do it,
Right.
right?
Now, something that you touched on earlier that I want to talk about, right, is just the sort of how Black stories are universal stories. I feel like the issue with some of how we market things or how things are received by the market is like, for some, the Blackness is like too much of a barrier to get behind, right? Like if it's like too Black, then it feels exclusionary to someone who's maybe not of the culture, or maybe didn't grow up around Black people. Um, how do you balance the fact that this is for us, by us, for the world, with the fact that it's for everyone?
Right. What it comes down to is stories with universal themes,
Mhm.
right? It's interesting what you say about how what we'll call the density of cultural representation in works
Mhm.
is seen as an exclusionary barrier by some.
Mhm.
I would say that that has not necessarily been the case in the history of entertainment,
Mhm.
right? What's interesting is that there was a time when people from different backgrounds did not get to tell their stories.
Yeah.
So people from diverse backgrounds had their cultures, but their cultures were communicated through the prism of white perspective.
Mhm.
Now they are represented through the prism of the perspective of ethnic origin,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
so what you're seeing is richness. What you're
Mhm.
seeing is nuance. What you're seeing is a truth, right? And I really don't buy that the stories exclude people. It's the willingness of the individual to want to explore different things.
Mhm.
Because if all you explore are the same things, that's no experience as a reader. That's no experience as a viewer of films. The fun is in stepping outside of your comfort zone, discovering new things. The fun is in meeting the people behind them and finding that you have a lot of this of similar interests.
Mhm.
Let's look at something like X-Men 97.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why X-Men 97 exploded is because so many people from different backgrounds were highly influenced, highly impacted by the original X-Men cartoon, which was the first time they saw themselves or saw these honest subjects being tackled,
Mhm.
right? And I believe the showrunner was black. The showrunner of
Yes.
X-Men 97, right? Bo DeMaio, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's a black man that's a queer man, and still and yet universal, right?
Mm,
So stories are universal. Stories are the nourishment that we give ourselves so that we can take a stab at understanding this world, or telling ourselves, reminding ourselves that we are not alone in it, that our experiences actually connect to other people who have similar experiences. It's building communities.
yeah.
Stories are the mechanisms through which we build communities. They are about building bridges.
Mm,
And so, what I would argue is that stories of culture are bridges, they're not barriers,
yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to, are people interested in walking across bridges? Are they only interested in staying in the island of their easily comfortable existence?
Right. Yeah. No, it's funny because I grew up, I came of age during the sort of the time of the Black Renaissance in media, of which Milestone was a part. But as Milestone's coming to newsstands, Martin's on TV, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is on TV. Seemingly every comedian worth their salt got a TV pilot around the time, like the Wayans brothers, all this stuff. And I guess the apex of that ends up being the Chappelle Show when we talk about just sort of cultural currency and crossover appeal and just being that sort of linchpin or launch pad for people to sort of galvanize around. Um, we're talking about universal themes. So I feel like at the front of each of those things, because it's media, we can argue that there's a charismatic person, right? Whether it's Martin, Dave Chappelle, Will Smith, whomever, right? And here we're talking about sort of it's a fresh crop of characters at the center of the story. And you've talked about this universal theme of family. I just want to sort of hammer home like the pitch for anyone who might be listening and is on the fence about what they're going to be getting in this story.
So, at the core of it is a really potent, intelligent, loving Black family of scientist explorer heroes,
Mm,
right? So they're called the McCallie family. The members were all named after famous real life people or fictional people. So similar to how Stan Lee always had these lessons and nods in the early Marvel comics of the 60s, the McCallie family have these historical nods for you to explore. And enemy that comes out of nowhere named Absalom invades their home and basically takes them out,
mm,
right? And scatters them throughout the multiverse. So now this family, which you've seen is perfectly intact, is separated, right?
mm,
And there's a god, the spider god, Anansi, right,
mm,
of African folklore, brings together a group of heroes to go throughout the multiverse, collect more Black heroes, and then go to each of the parallel universes
mm,
where a family member has been stranded and help them escape.
mm,
And what you find is that even though the family members are working on separate efforts, these things will align and come together. And it really is a story about family and also about the grand adventure when you go back to explore films of the 20s, the kinds of things that were the inspiration for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Everyone wants to go, you like to go into the unknown,
yeah.
right? What's on the other side of that? What's on the horizon? I'm not satisfied with what my life is. I want more.
Mm,
So, the same way that the Fantastic Four goes to all these different types of places like the negative zone or the psychoverse,
mhm,
this family, they live by exploring the unknown to protect the human race. Now they've been forced into it,
yeah.
and that brings about different challenges, right?
Mm,
But the unknown, the big adventure, the not knowing if you're going to come back, the not knowing everything that's out there, that's part of the fun of all of this. I mean, that's part of the fun of all stories, right?
Yeah.
We want to be taken on a ride, and by the time that ride is over, we want to feel fulfilled. I think we want to feel more than entertained. I think we want to be thinking about the story after we close the book, or we want to be talking about the story weeks after we've closed the book. So that's what Epiphany Engine is, right? It's really the ultimate comics crossover in one book.
Yeah.
You're not going to have to go through a year of comic books to
Mm.
read this. There's the one book. It's a true graphic novel, right? And that's really ultimately it. And just us bringing together the best people to produce something of quality. Because here's the thing, you know, people aren't stupid. There's this whole narrative going around about Marvel Studios and superhero fatigue. And that
Hmm.
gets mentioned a lot, superhero fatigue, superhero fatigue. That's actually ridiculous. There's no such thing as a genre fatigue. There's
Hmm.
only a fatigue of an absence of quality.
Yeah.
People are tired of absence of quality. If you give people quality every week, I don't
Hmm.
care what genre it is, they're going to want more,
Yeah.
right? So this is the promise of top level quality representing the best of what the Black independent comics scene and the mainstream scene, when working together, have to offer in one book.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's dope. When you were just talking about like sort of the central themes, what came to mind for me is like Fantastic Four, like Flash Gordon, like all of that. But then with a black family at the center, with all of these characters, again, just it's really hard to express the breadth of this project. Like just how many publishers, how many characters. When I tell you this really is representative of all of the online black comic space that I've been a part of for the last 5 years, like everyone I can think of is represented here.
Yep.
So it's definitely a hallmark moment that I don't want to miss out on, and you definitely shouldn't either. I think I'm backing at the hardcover level. Um, but
That's understandable. I mean, listen, hardcover books, they have a special kind of prestige. When you put them on your bookshelf, they can take more punishment, of
mhm.
course. But at every level, there's value for people, and that's something that we wanted to make sure about. And again, when it comes to the story, this is a story with heart.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing, right? It's like this is a story with heart, with a humanity, and I'm really honored to be a part of it and working with Tony Cottrell, the publisher, and the other editors, Marcus H. Roberts and Brian Hawkins, and working with all the different creators, Jibba Malai Anderson himself, a founder. Um, his company has been around for 25 years,
Mm.
right? He's most known for his comic book, The Horseman,
Mhm.
right? And he's the person that you've seen that has been responsible for a lot of the graphics of this campaign. So
Mm.
really have to give it up to Jibba Malai Anderson. He's really been just like a great person to work with and a great ally.
Awesome. Awesome. So the Epiphany Engine is live on Kickstarter right now. Like I said, when this goes live, you guys have about 14 days to get your stuff together and back this book. It's live. You need to support it. You want this in your collection. Like you don't want to miss out on this. Before I let you go, Mr. Illidge, um, you have a sort of unique um, perspective in that you learned from two luminaries in this space, right? You start your career as the assistant to the president of Milestone Media, Derek Dingle, who, is a man of few public words, but obviously is a giant in business. And by the time you end your time at Milestone, or Milestone's time ends it for you, um, you're an editor at Milestone Comics and you're working closely with editor-in-chief Dwayne McDuffie. Again, anyone who knows the name Dwayne McDuffie knows just how much of a giant he was, as a
Mm-hmm.
writer, as just as a mind, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
man just was a genius in every sense of the word. What would you say are the biggest lessons you learned from each of these men that you've taken with you?
Wow, there's really so many. If I have to distill it down to one for each, I remember something that Derek told me a long time ago. To give you a little bit of a personal anecdote, he took me to Macy's 34th Street and he bought me my first blazer that I ever owned as a
Wow.
professional, um, which, was such a kind and profound gesture. He said to me, I can show you how to get through the door, but once you get through, it's up to you.
Mm,
Right. And what that says to me is that even with advocacy, you have the responsibility of how you present yourself and how you perform once you're in these halls of business, once you're in these arenas of creative entrepreneurship and financial activity, right? Insofar as Dwayne, it's really tough. The man taught me so many things. I think what I learned from him more than anything else is something that's going to sound simplistic, but it's pretty profound. One day he just said to me, he said, human beings are capable of amazing things. And when I first heard it, it didn't it didn't hit me. But as I go on in this life and we are beset by so many challenges, I'm constantly reminded that we are capable of amazing things. We can save each other through stories, literally, right?
mm,
We can affect one another. We can help one another. Um, we're truly amazing. And if we can get past the nonsense,
mm.
look at what we can accomplish. So, I grow up, I get up every morning with a sense of gratitude, for this life that I have and this life that I've had. And I'm I remember that we're capable of amazing things. And so I just throw myself at the world every day. And I would I would say that's what we need to do,
Yeah.
right? Like wake up. Hopefully there's something good in your life about being alive and throw yourself at the world, right?
Mm,
Whatever story you have to tell, whatever impact that you have to make, go and do it. You know,
yeah.
go and do it.
Well, listen, that is excellent parting advice. So, Mr. Illidge, man, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for talking to us about Epiphany Engine, also giving us a bit of a lens into your career, your past career. There's so much we didn't talk about. I got to get an update about this Zero movie. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff
All
maybe
right.
at another
We'll have a
time.
sequel interview and we can talk about a number of things because by the time we have that interview, there'll be more announcements.
Awesome. Awesome.
because the mission never stops.
Can't wait. I
you
can't wait.
know, but again, thank you so much for having me here, Brandon, and thank you so much for your support of this project. This is really what's going to make this possible. It's
Mm,
people supporting it through action as opposed to through words and well wishes.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's no problem at all. Well, look, guys, again, the Epiphany Engine campaign is live on Kickstarter right now. It's not a lot of time left. Go ahead and get your pledges in so you can secure your copy of this book, whether you decide to go with just, the single issue, standard cover, all the way up to the box set. It's all available for you. And after you do that, go home and read something dope today. Peace.